Yo, welcome and welcome back. In this video, we want to know where you stand. More importantly, how does your stance affect your potential power and your kettlebell swing is what we'll go with today. Does that sound about right?
That sounds fair.
Yeah, let's get into it. And we'll use this red box to teach us things. All right? All right.
Okay. Let's take a look at this, this box. This is going to represent just a plane to map out some spaces. I'll explain a little bit more about what this is. But what I want to do is orient you into the model so this makes sense. This stick here is going to be representative of the femur. We're going to imagine the femur from the top. So this is going to represent the right hip. So if you look at my right hip here, where it's connected here, if I look straight down and let's say I were to squat, you're going to see that femur from the top. As I deviate my foot out, this is going to move this way. The farther out I move my foot, the farther this is going to swing in that direction. So keep this in mind as we go through the following explanation, just to orient yourself into space so this makes a little bit of sense. So here's our femur from the top. We want to remember that in order to move in the sagittal plane, we need an axis that's coming from a different direction. So we're going to call this medial lateral. If I were to make this rotate, and it's going to be, if I were to actually represent this, it would be this way. If I actually made an axis for this to spin around, it would move this way. This is going to come in handy a little bit later. So let's make sure we orient ourselves and say, this is our right hip. It's attached to the hip, so it can't, it can swing out this way, but it's not gonna pop out, hopefully. So let's keep that in mind. As a general rule, the farther the femur is from this axis here, the more it's going to be able to move in the corresponding plane. This axis of rotation is going to give us sagittal plane movement.
Got it.
The farther this is from this axis, okay, it's going to be imaginary from now on.
Oh, I love imaginary.
The farther it is, the more motion it's gonna give, up until obviously 90 degrees, because once you start spinning that way, you're gonna get the same thing just on the other side, right? But that's not gonna happen because this is a right hip and it's only gonna be able to go so far.
Yeah.
So if you look at the green dot, that's roughly the end of this stick, yes?
That's the green dot.
So it stands to reason this stick is a finite length. It's not going to get longer, it's not gonna get shorter. As I move my stance out, remember this is the top of the femur. And here you're going to be the lord of the dot.
Oh.
So as I move this out and I move my foot into the frontal plane, go ahead and put a green dot at the end of that stick.
Is this green?
No, that's yellow, but that'll do.
Okay.
Jeremiah has trouble with colors. and social interactions.
Yes, well actually I might be all right. One of us might have trouble with social interactions.
All right, so let's go ahead and keep going. Let's keep stepping out. And we're going to go farther. We're going to take a really big step out toward, that's pink.
Got it. I knew that. I was just testing them.
I still haven't gotten the green one.
Okay, yeah. Process of elimination.
And let's go ahead and take a really wide step out. And that's probably all we need. Finally, we get green. So if you look at the amount of excursion that this femur has in the sagittal plane. So let's pretend this is a graph. This represents the frontal plane. This represents the sagittal plane. And as we go this way, the amount of sagittal plane movement increases. You can see as the femur swings out to the side, we have less and less motion available in the sagittal plane, and we're going to have more motion available in the frontal plane. Because what's happening is this is getting more and more parallel to its axis, at which point you're not going to have any sagittal plane movement at all. Here you're still going to have a little bit, not all that much. But again, the closer it is to this 90 degrees here, the closer it is perpendicular to this plane, you're going to get more motion. The closer to parallel, you're going to get less motion. And this is going to be relevant for reasons that we're going to get into in a second.
Got it. All right.
You want to ask me a very insightful leading question?
Yes. What the hell do I do now? I'm going to swing. How do I know where my feet are supposed to be?
Going back to what we just learned.
Wait.
Whoa.
Which dot am I supposed to be targeting here?
It's not going to be that simple.
Okay.
They're going to. It never is, especially not with me.
Yeah.
There are going to be some interactions going on. What we wanted to do here is illustrate the closer your stance is to that hip, the more you're going to be in that sagittal plane. Now, the sagittal plane, in case people aren't up on their planes, that's totally cool. You don't always need to know this stuff, but the sagittal plane is going to move. So if you're swinging your arm this way, just like the kettlebell swings, that's the sagittal plane. That's primarily the plane that the kettlebell swing is going to take place in. Motion never takes place in one plane. It doesn't work, especially with the body. Anytime a joint is moving, you hear things like hinge joints. A little bit misleading, but we can use these things to talk about general concepts, and the general concept will hold. Mm-hmm. So the closer your stance, meaning the closer the hip is to its center, so your axis is running that way, so your leg can move that way. Of course, your leg's not going to move because it's attached to the ground. Your body's going to move around it. Mm-hmm. So the closer your stance, the more motion you're going to have in the sagittal plane. Why is that relevant? When we get into the muscles we want to use, the orientation of the fibers of these big powerful muscles, the quads, the glutes, the hamstrings, these are primarily the muscles we want to do the swing. They're best able to take the load. You're going to have some contribution from the adductors, abductors, external rotators, all of these things. You know, your glutes do more than just flex or more than extend. However, that's primarily where we want them to be. Another really important thing to remember is the very first thing as you go back into this loading phase of the swing. So let's say you're at the top.
Do you want me to be from the side here?
It doesn't matter. So let's say you finish your swing and you go back to get into your second swing. As he reaches back here, this is hamstring. Nothing else is really activating yet until he comes forward. You're going to get that. We've gone over the stretch shortened cycle before. Those hamstrings are going to stretch and activate, and that's going to be the first part of getting that kettlebell to come forward. If you don't have the hamstrings lined up in that sagittal plane, let's say you're too wide, you're not going to be able to use your hamstrings as well. You're going to use other muscles. You're probably going to use these bad boys here, which may be fine for you. You may need to use some of them. You know, again, we're not talking about things in isolation, but they're not the best suited to perform the movement, because no matter what you do, unless you're intentionally doing some kind of weird curving swing, which you can do with a split stance, your swing, let's take a two-arm swing, is going to move forward and back. So we want everything to be as lined up as possible. So if we go ahead and face the camera, it's probably the easiest. So first thing we need to consider is bell width. So if you're swinging, what do you usually swing with? The 12, right?
Yeah, that's my number one.
All right.
Hey, so, look, I mean, we're all somewhere.
So he doesn't need to be really wide for this bell, right? But he's also not going to be able to perform a lot of motion here. You see, he's going to get stuck. Okay, his arms are too wide. He's not going to be able to reach back very far. Also, he doesn't have very good balance. So let's get him a bigger bell. Let's grab one of these. That'll work. So we got a 28.
It's quite a jump.
So we are going to need to have a gap that's wide enough for the bell. Stick your arms straight out. Bring that arms down and reach back. Reach back. Okay. So at this point, the gap here is not restricted by his upper body, is it? Mm-mm. So go ahead and pop up. I'm a little bit wider, so I've got to stand with my feet a tiny bit wider if I'm going to get my arms reaching farther back. So there's going to be, the point is there's an interplay. We don't immediately want to say, oh, well, let me stand with my feet right next to the bell, and that's my stance. That may not work for the upper body. There's going to be a lack of balance. So what I want you to do is I want you to get a swing that is as narrow as you feel like you can possibly go. And let's see how that looks, and I want you to tell us how it feels.
Okay.
Okay, how'd that feel?
Felt good.
Don't move your feet.
Felt good.
Go narrower. So he's going to get more access to the sagittal plane here. We don't know if this is going to be the right call or not. We're going to see. How'd those feel?
A little more powerful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we did improve a little bit. One thing I was watching for was the knee. if you bring the knees too close together, from my angle I couldn't see a lot of deviation, but if you go too close, then what you're going to do is your knees are going to go in and out, and that is going to be negated. It doesn't matter what plane you're oriented in. If you're moving primarily in this way rather than that way, meaning the transverse plane rather than, or in the frontal plane rather than the sagittal plane, it's not really going to matter. Now what I want you to do is take a wider stance. Okay, that's a little, don't exaggerate too much, but that's a little wider than normal.
All right, this is a little bit wider than normal right here.
All right, so let's see what you get there. How'd that feel?
I mean, it felt fine, but it didn't feel like I was able to get into the ground as much as some of the previous ones.
So what I saw is that what we call the turnaround phase is you got back. There was a little bit of a lag from the time the bell hit the back until it moved forward. So we negated some of that stretch shorten cycle. What you may have felt though is you may have felt very easy to get back there, because when you widened your hips, you gave your joints more room to move.
Right.
You so not just sagittal, but some frontal and extra transverse stuff. So you allowed more free movement, and that may have felt good in a way, but your power also diminished. It was noticeable. I could see that turnaround time increasing. There was a lot less elasticity. It just was a less powerful swing. Not necessarily wrong or bad, but in this situation with a single 28 kilo bell, wouldn't be, if you're training for power, would not be the stance I would choose for you. Now, if we don't need to grab it, but if we were to get a 48, which is roughly twice as big in terms of diameter, plus you're going to get more forces, you may need to go a little wider. We're looking to widen the stance. Go ahead and grab the other 28. So now we're going double bells. So let's put those bad boys together. So now if they're touching, suddenly we've got a much wider stance here. There's not much that we can do about here, but the reason why we wanted to call this out is now we know the wider you go to the side, the less of the sagittal plane you have access to. What we're looking at now is we're not just doubling the load. Yes, we're literally getting another kettlebell of equal mass, so in a sense that's doubled, but we're also playing with his geometry and his architecture. So not only are we increasing the weight by the 100%, okay,
all right,
but we're also widening his stance, and we're taking away some of his sagittal plane power production capability. So we're making this even harder than that, and that's one thing that you want to remember. The weight on the bell, yes, it's relevant, but the way you move the weight is also going to be important. So yes, you're going to have to get your feet at least that wide, and you may need to even go wider because you now are moving a heavier load. You may need a bigger base to improve your balance. But we're doubling the load, but we're also diminishing the amount that you can go here and here. So you may have to start getting more internal, external rotation through the hips, things like that. So really, really important to realize with your swing, especially when you're going up into doubles, that even if you, let's say you had a 28, let's say you were taking just 2 16s, okay, or 2 20s. It doesn't sound like a tremendous amount of weight to jump up,
right?
But when you look at how your body has to meet the challenge, you're actually giving yourself a pretty substantial load increase, not just with the load of the bell, but how you have to move the bell.
Great. All right. Well, there you have it. Some things to consider when you're choosing the stance for your swing and like what your objective is, whether it's 2 bells and determining the width, whether it's 1 bell and trying to maximize power. Play with it and see what stance works best for you, for your goal. But this is one way to find out where you're at. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Stay strong.